Nearly 6 years after the first PlayStation came out, its sequel came onto the scene and would remain in production for 13 years, which is practically unheard of in a console generation. It boasted nearly full backwards compatibility with every PlayStation 1 game, giving owners access to 2 full libraries of games by the end, and also functioned as a DVD player, which was cool and wonderful in the year 2000. It was so successful that it ultimately forced Sega out of the console market and left the other consoles in the 6th generation completely in the dust to become the best-selling console of all time. Now 20 years old, the PlayStation 2's legend and legacy is well and truly secure. So on today's episode, we're going to scratch the surface and talk about what made this console great and some of the games that made it so, next on Downloadable Content. Hello everyone, welcome to DLC. I am Brian, and with me we have Ron.
Hi everyone.
We have Ronny.
Greetings.
We have Spencer.
Howdy.
And for the first time in 3 years, our own captain and Doug has returned to the fray.
Hey everybody.
Long time no
Doug
see.
has entered the battle.
Yes. new challenger approaches.
A better accepted DLC than Blythe.
You set the bar low enough, you trip over it.
It's underground, actually. That's where the bar is. But yes, welcome back, Doug. Long time no see. Glad you're here. So today we're going to be talking about PS2 because it is about to turn 20. It turns 20 in March. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, damn. Really? 2000 was 20 years ago? Really? I could swear the 90s were yesterday. Really? But you know, before I get the Geritol and the Mylanta, before we dive in, just want to remind everyone that every single episode of Downloadable Content can be found on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, and Google Play Music, as well as our website, dlcpodcast.com. Go on the website, check out all the episodes, check out upcoming recordings. You can let us know if you want to be in on an episode, or you can let us give us ideas for future episodes by either clicking the feedback button or getting a hold of us on Facebook at Downloadable Content or on Twitter at DL Content. So all the different ways to get downloadable content into your ears, and it's all free. Every single bit of it. So here we are. PlayStation 2, 20 years of age. Good God.
So I guess this would be the good time to bring up that the reason I bought a PlayStation 2 was so I could play the sequel of a game that was on Super Nintendo.
What game?
Chrono Cross, because I never owned a PlayStation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that and the backwards compatibility was something that sold me, because I was like, you know what? I want to play this game because I want I want to play the sequel to my favorite game of all time, and then I'll have a huge library that I can go into. And so, as someone who had never, wasn't loyal to Sony at that point, being able to expand my library that much and give me that many more options was a huge reason for me pre-ordering the console.
Yeah, I did not buy this console at launch because, at the time, I was not yet gainfully employed, and getting anything video game related from my parents was going to be a hell no. So my stepbrother owned a PS1 and he liked to power trip. He would never let me use it. So I said, you know what? I know that you're going to get a PS2 and you're going to do the same fucking thing. So no, I'm going to save up money. I will wait about a year after the PS2 launch and then I will buy my own. So fuck off. So similar reasons, Doug. The big reason why I wanted a PS2 was, at the time, knowing that the PS2 was going to be virtually fully backwards compatible with the entire PS1 library. And there were a lot of PS1 games that I wanted to play, but couldn't because of the evil older brother. And so a lot of my memory and my nostalgia of the PS2, was playing a lot of the great PS1 classics, as well as the PS2 one, later on down the road. So,
and the other reason was the only DVD player I had was a DVD drive on my desktop.
Yes.
Yup, that was a huge selling point for that system.
Exactly. I mean, I think there's a lot of people, we're all probably approximately the same age, where that was their first DVD player and stuff like that. And the thing that I really think about when I think of the PlayStation 2 is it's the first console I know where it felt like everybody had one.
They did. 155 million units sold worldwide during its run, during its 13-year run.
I was going to say that's where I was going to go. I was one of those people who didn't. I am an RPG gamer.
Of course you weren't.
I'm an RPG gamer, and at the time, it didn't feel like there was much on the PS2 at the beginning. So I felt no reason to go out and pick it up. And I had a desktop, so I started doing a lot more PC stuff at that point. I didn't pick up a PS2 until the PS3 came out. And I've since experienced many of the great games, but I knew going into this I was going to have a different experience than the rest of you, and that's part of the reason why I really wanted to be on this episode.
Yeah, that's crazy, because for me, it's probably the exact opposite experience. I missed out on the first couple years of the system's lifespan, not out of any negative press, just because I didn't get a PlayStation 1 at all. So I didn't have the pull of any of the previous games to draw me. And basically, what everyone's saying about the DVD player, I think that the PlayStation 2's one of the first systems that truly tries to be an entertainment system and not just a game console. Obviously, later iterations would be more successful, but this seems to be like the first stepping stones with like the broadband access and the all the like iToy, different peripherals, the DVD player option, the reverse compatibility. But no, the game that got me to buy a PS2 was Soul Calibur 3.
And I think it's so funny to look at it now and look at all these parts of it that are now expectations. We talk about reverse compatibility. Whenever new systems announced, that's the question that everyone wants to know.
Backwards compatibility.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Being able to play DVD or now Blu-ray. There's that, being able to connect online easily. This is where everyone's asking now. And it's, the expectations. And it was. It and the Dreamcast were really revolutionary.
Mm-hmm. And ultimately, this console was just absolutely successful. And you're right. Like, to Spencer's point, this is I think the first system that I personally remember in which you had a machine that was multifunctional. It had more than, it was not just a game console the way just about every other console was prior. And And at the time when it launched, it was $300, which was just, now we look at that and go, wow, that's cheap. But
Yeah.
but
Yeah, that was a big that was like bad press back then for them. They had to fight that price point. I remember being in high school and thinking like, oh man, I was gonna think about buying that, but I just can't afford to put that kind of money together.
And, as I say, and it's kind of funny, since yesterday we were prognosticating that we were hoping that they would stay under $490. That would stay at $499 for the new consoles, and we're talking about how expensive this was at the time, which it was. But it's just funny to look back at how times have changed.
So, I still have my PS2, even though I have one of the early PS3s that were just about fully backwards compatible with the older discs. But it's like I still use mine, pretty regularly.
I still have mine as well.
It's still hooked up to my TV too. Now the thing to look at the catalog, but backwards compatibility has kind of gone away for some of that stuff. But also, how many games? Just if you stop and think about it, how many PS2 games do you know have gotten HD remastered or are now just digital downloads on Sony systems and stuff like that? And I was just thinking about, like just right off the top of my head, like thinking like all the Final Fantasy games that were on there. How many remakes, re-releases have we gotten of Shadow of the Colossus?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Persona 3 has gotten 2 remakes.
Mm-hmm.
Like the thing is, the PS2, counting backwards compatibility with the PS1, probably has the second strongest library of all video games ever, second to only the DS and Advance. And that's huge. Like, that's an amazing library.
And that's the only other system that rivals the PS2 in terms of sales, which kind of speaks to what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Yep.
There were a total of 4,490 games for the PlayStation 2. And that includes Japanese-only releases and European-only releases, as well as North American releases. So almost 4,500 games just for PS2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
and 4,000 of them are sports games. I'm just looking at like the Metacritic list of like the best scored PS2 games of all time, and it's like sports game. I'm like, oh my god, I forget how like it. I'm like getting PTSD from when I worked at GameStop and just had like bags and bags of returns of like sports games, and it's just like, oh my god.
I was gonna say, it is either the 5th or 6th longest selling console of all time, which I thought it was going to be higher than that, but that's still amazing.
Yeah, I mean, 13 years in a console generation, as I said in the intro, is virtually unheard of. Like, Sony was really, that was part of their business plan, was to just ride it out for as long as possible.
It matches Super Nintendo at 13 years. It's beaten out by Game Boy at 14, the Atari 2600 for 15, the NES for 20, and the Sega Master System ongoing.
So it's
at 26 years right now, but ongoing.
Yeah. So it's like, just I remember, we were 3, 4, 5 years into the PS3's life cycle, and you'd still get the occasional little bit in like Game Informer or whatever game magazine about this, this game that's coming out for the PS2 in like 2009, and I'm like, who the hell is still making games for DDR? Okay.
Oh man.
So.
Yep.
There's going to be a ton of games that we're going to be talking about here, and this is we're gonna barely scratch the surface, because I'm sure we all have a general idea and have probably owned a considerable number of the games that were considered, the best. But I'm sure we all each have a personal list of fond games that we owned that may not have been, among the best of the best of the best, sir. With honors. And like, I mentioned that I played a lot of PS1 games on it, but specifically PS2 games. Like, one of the first games I remember playing for the system, I think I had two of them. I think I bought Gran Turismo 3 and and Metal Gear Solid 2 were like the first couple of PS2 games that I ever owned.
Wait, so you played Metal Gear Solid 2 before you played Metal Gear Solid 1?
No, I had played Metal Gear Solid 1.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, oh my god.
No, I was gonna say that would probably be a better decision.
No, I did play Metal Gear Solid 1. I did. That was one of the games that my stepbrother allowed me to play on his PS1 because he loved it so much he wanted to inflict it on me as
you shall pass.
He wanted to. He loved, and he still to this day he's a huge Metal Gear Solid fan. He's like, Brian, you have to play this game. So yes, I did play Metal Gear Solid 1 on the PS1, but Metal Gear Solid 2, oh boy, that was a trip. Still,
one I'm going to throw out there because I really think it changed the entire franchise. GTA 3.
Yeah.
Before that, it was the little overhead games and stuff. But GTA 3 changed that franchise forever, and for the better.
It changed everything forever. That's like one of the most influential titles ever. Like, period. Like, the amount of games that it influences, even to this day, is like overwhelming. I remember I replayed that like a few years ago and was just like, it's so re-accessible because so many games still use so many of the ideas that this game promoted. And the game came out in 2001. It's crazy.
It was remarkably influential. It did so many good things for the industry, but it killed a franchise that I had previously enjoyed because I like GTA 1 and 2, and I cannot stand any of the ones after it.
So it almost sounds like Grand Theft Auto 3 was kind of did to the Grand Theft Auto franchise as Resident Evil 4 did to its franchise.
Yep.
Yeah, I can see how you'd make that comparison.
Because I do remember playing Grand Theft Auto 1 and then seeing just how different Grand Theft Auto 3 was. And I haven't played a Grand Theft Auto game since, but that was...
I mean, it's kind of like looking at the original Fallout versus Fallout 4, where they're almost not even the same type of game. Like, they're not even the same type of game anymore, but, like, the only thing you can see that's the same is the setting. Which isn't necessarily bad, like the later Fallout stuff, but it is very similar with the GTAs, where they basically kept the idea but completely remade everything else.
It's very hard to unwind a franchise and get like older generation style gameplay. Developers are very hesitant to go back like that. So like, it would be cool to get like I think the DS Chinatown Wars or Chinatown Stories was like the closest thing that you'd probably ever get to that old style GTA game.
Yeah, well, there's always the indie community. They'll come out with something eventually.
Yeah, probably. Now, I seem to remember Doug back in my brief MCLA days. My memory could be fuzzy on this, but I seem to recall you being very, very much into Katamari.
I was waiting for this one because it was my room was at the start of the hallway down to your room, and that launched that franchise. But I remember if I was just hanging out in my room, I'd be sitting there with the door open, come on in, and people would just come in and just stare and watch this game, and be like, and you'd hear the guys be like, they're too cool for this thing's so stupid, and then I'd point out, you just watched me play the entire final level. That's like a 30-minute mission. If it's so stupid, why are you still here? Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, that Katamari was one that franchise exploded on that system.
Like I remember you playing that just, and again, even I look like, what am I watching? Like,
mm-hmm. It's I mean, in a weird way, it's that train wreck mentality of I don't want to stare, but I can't pull myself away.
Yeah. And that speaks to the base of the PS2's like reach. Like games like Katamari can only exist on systems that have like just you can afford to try crazy stuff like that when you have such a huge player base to draw from. So even a game like that is still going to sell decently well because enough people will take interest in it. I would want to watch the train wreck, so to speak.
I would also say that it's part of when they transitioned from when all the companies transitioned from 2D to 3D, they were far more experimental than they typically were, and the PS2 was at the tail end of that because there were a bunch of experimental games in the PS1, and then the PS2 they were taking those experiments, finding what worked and what didn't, and doubling down on it. Mm-hmm. So that's why we got so many classics like that.
Well, also the PS2's power allowed developers to not have to choose between like low quality visuals to have a very immersive and large game world, or vice versa. They can have the good visuals where you don't have like Cloud-esque like Popeye arms, but like these expansive vast background visuals, but you can have the GTA 3s with like the crazy huge city and all these characters and all that stuff, or you can have the very condensed Metal Gear Solid 2 style story where there's not a ton of vast expanse world, but like the graphics are amazingly good and stuff like that.
Yeah, the thing I'll just go back to Katamari too is you look at that, it's very basic design, like it still has that very blocky design, but that's clearly a choice for the aesthetic they're going for. Like they want that look, and where the power is, like you think about all the different objects that you can possibly pick up as you're rolling around, and think about how it has to keep track of all of these things, and a bunch of them are moving while you're around, and that's where the real power of the PS2 is kind of hidden in the background there. So, another franchise I'll toss out that PlayStation started, God of War.
Not even just a franchise; it's like Sony's first party development really was born from that game, because like when you think of first party Sony titles before God of War, it's stuff that's like more kid friendly titles that are like platformers and stuff like that.
Exactly.
But,
like,
God of War
I think like
was
Crash
like the
Spyro.
Yeah, like exactly. Like God of War was that shift where like because when God of War came out, I was like pretty much getting done with being in college, and so I'm like being close to that like true adult age. And I was like, whoa, this is a shift. Because, like, you always kind of felt Sony was kind of competing with Nintendo on the, like, kids' toy game front. But then, like, that game kind of, shifted Sony's mindset. Was like, oh, we can target an audience demographic that Nintendo doesn't even really acknowledge. And kind of to this day still really doesn't.
Yep. I remember one of my friends hyping that up to me by saying, one of the spoilers I read is that one of the solutions to one of the puzzles is using a prisoner in a cage as a key. And I was just like, oh, that's dark.
Ron, we haven't heard much from you yet.
Well, you guys have been talking. I didn't feel the need to interrupt when there's you're talking about a lot of good shit on the PS2.
Well, thank you for the decorum, but let's have a contribution from you.
Probably the first game I got for the PS2. If memory serves, I believe the first game I got was Gran Turismo 3, which we talked about very briefly. And the other one was Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3.
That was a popular franchise. I do remember my stepbrother really getting in on the first couple of games.
Yeah, and the reason why I remember that game specifically is just because besides it being one of the first PS2 titles I owned, it was also a sense of increased play that you had available to you compared to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 or 2, where the stages were relatively small and the graphics of it itself wasn't it was legible, if that makes sense, but not pleasing, if it's still pointed angles, the polygons are still kind of visible. But I think beginning with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, you get to see more detail of the skaters that you're supposed to be playing as, and still doing that notion of being cartoony and crazy whenever they want to, with the tricks you can do and the codes you can do, whether it's no gravity or big heads or different colored blood whenever we splatter on the ground. But it took that general idea of being you have 3 minutes to go and do as much crazy shit on a skateboard as you can think of. Have at it.
There was another game that I remember my stepbrother loving, and then I also played SSX Tricky.
Ooh,
Yeah,
that was one of the earliest titles, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm looking at
launch,
it right now.
wasn't
October 30, 2000. So yeah, that would have been
That's
if not
title?
if not launch within a month or two of launch for sure.
And it's still the song still gets stuck in my head sometimes, and it's just the things that stick in your brain 20 years later. And it's the Tricky theme. So
if we're talking music, though, I'm gonna throw out one other big franchise that started on the PlayStation 2, Guitar Hero.
Yeah.
Think about all the sequels and Rock Band after that.
Yeah.
And then how quickly that fad died.
Okay, it's to be fair, it was a concept of Japan had done a similar thing before with Gitaru Boy or something like that. I forget the actual name of the game, but they had a similar gameplay where it's basically take a guitar-shaped peripheral and play music along with it in tune with the beats on the screen. But with Guitar Hero, it was a bunch of licensed music that a lot of people in America was familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
And that franchise ballooned very quickly, but it also died fairly quickly because it came out in 2005.
Yeah, around there, yeah.
And then, basically by Guitar Hero 3, you're looking at basically it jumping to the PS3/360, and then people are clamoring left, right, and center for DLC songs for it, and they just were unusually slow to put them out.
Mm-hmm.
I just for maybe a year or two, that was basically all the rage. It was anytime I went to a friend's house, anytime somebody was having a party or get together, Guitar Hero or Rock Band was always there. It was for a while. It sort of replaced Smash as the default party game.
Well, it was like a non-gamer friendly party game, which is
Yep.
what made it like, I would be in people's places that had a PS2 only as a DVD player, and they would have like every Guitar Hero game with all the setups, and that's the only games they would own. And it's like the permeation of the PS2 into the general public is something that I think is understated for the console. Like a lot of people that would really never had the console bought it for very specific reasons.
Oh yeah.
Kind of like the Wii.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking music game. I mentioned, well, just very, very briefly, DDR. I mean, I bought a couple of dance pads and whenever I had parties over, DDR was the hot shit for a while as well. I loved it.
Yeah. I'm trying to think, what were, the most, ridiculous peripherals that people had for PS2, and I had the Taiko Drum Master drum for that, which I was so frustrating because I didn't have a modded PS2, so I only had the American version, so I only knew, some of these songs, and I was like, what about all this great anime music?
Yeah, I think most of the peripherals people are probably familiar with in terms of PS2 are the Guitar Hero guitar, the bongo drums, and then DDR dance pads.
Yep.
Luckily for me, growing up as an NES child, I kind of understood that most of the peripherals were just not worth the effort. So I don't even think I had anything besides the generic Guitar Hero guitar. Was probably the only peripheral for the PS2 I owned.
I mean, I knew about the peripherals, like the iToy and whatnot, but yeah, the only thing I had was a couple of dance pads.
And speaking of iToy, that's kind of a precursor to the Kinect and all that video capture gameplay overlaid over terrible graphics kind of.
Yeah, trying to green. It's an overlay of you trying to play on a green screen when they don't even do the green screening half the time, basically.
Yes, exactly. It's like half the tech at double the cost.
Yeah. Let's also keep in mind too that there was an add-on you could put on for the PS2, which was a modem, which allowed you to get online and play through dial-up modem, no less, certain games like SOCOM and Final Fantasy 11.
And the Resident Evil Survivor games.
Outbreak as
Outbreak,
well.
Outbreak, that's the one, yeah. I was going to say, there's another one too. Yep, those were interesting to say the least.
And I think SOCOM was a Sony first-party title, if memory serves.
Yes. I'm trying to remember the exact development house, but it's escaping me right now. Let's see.
And I don't think we've seen SOCOM even after the PS2 era. I think it was almost exclusively PS2.
Yeah, I feel like you might have had a PSP version game, but that's about it.
Well, yeah, the PS3 started with all those new, exclusive shooter games like Killzone and the other, whatever that other one was that I can't remember, because obviously
Call
it was
of
so
Duty
successful.
started up that. Well, Call of Duty got popular around then, but
I remember when I started college in 2003, my roommate was an international student. He was from Japan, and he was playing Final Fantasy XI before it released in the US. So I'm watching him play this, and I can't understand anything that's on the screen because it's all in Japanese. And he didn't speak a whole lot of English, but the English that he did know, I would say Final Fantasy, and that's how we bonded. It was just because that was like I couldn't understand anything he was saying or anything on screen, but you say Final Fantasy, and that was it. That was the phrase. We both knew what that was, and so here I am looking at what was Final Fantasy XI before it had released in the US.
So, going with the kind of the Japanese topic, and I mentioned this briefly with the Taigama Taiko, PlayStation 2 stands out to me as, and maybe it was just timing, like pretty much the first console where we started getting like anime licensed games in America. Like often, actually getting an English language track for it and stuff too, not just a straight translation. It was some of the earliest ones, but it was the first time you really saw that trend of it, because that's also when like Gundam was becoming really big in America. Naruto was taking off and things like that. There were a couple PS1 games, but the wave really hit in PS2.
I would argue the wave hit on Dreamcast, and then the ones that came to PS2 were a reaction to that.
Okay.
Because that was one of the major things they were trying to do with the Dreamcast. And then Dreamcast did not last very, very long, as opposed to the PS2, but the PS2 kind of took that wave, and then with the death of the Dreamcast, just continued riding that wave.
It's also a thing too that licensing for for anime titles was a thing in the late 90s. I know that I believe we had a Dragon Ball license and a Sailor Moon license, like in like the late 90s.
I don't remember Sailor Moon one. Definitely Dragon Ball though.
I know Dragon Ball because you had Dragon Ball Budokai.
I mean, we had Dragon Ball as early as the NES.
Yeah, but I don't. But they were not necessarily in the States per se.
Yeah.
No, we had Dragon Ball on the NES. They just renamed it. I owned it.
Sailor Moon never made it overseas, but Dragon Ball did.
Yeah. I mean, when you have a library that is big as the PS2s, I mean that only makes logical sense, especially after Dreamcast folded. These developers going, okay, what now? And
they're clearly not going to the N64.
No.
Yeah.
So there was really, it was kind of like a perfect storm for Sony, because if Sega had been a little more intelligent with their console release scheduling, they might have actually proven to take a big chunk of the Sony market and actually make it a more competitive scene. And instead, Sony just basically absorbed Sega's entire base of sales, because the N64 was just not successful enough to do that. And then the GameCube came out and basically nobody cared.
I would argue that the massive, massive success of the PS2 was as much because of the failures of Sega and Nintendo at that time as it was from any individual thing that they did as a company.
It was also a thing, too, that around the time that the Dreamcast was failing, a lot of the people that were developing on the Dreamcast were going, well, how are we going to make our money back? And Sony was just like, just bring it over to the PS2. It's not that different of hardware specs. And we'll give you development kits for your games to help port them over easier. It's part of the reason why you see a lot of the a lot of the more a lot of the more memorable Dreamcast games showing up on the PS2 within a year or two of the Dreamcast demise.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the raw sales numbers, I mean, again, PS2, 155 million, Xbox 24 million, GameCube 22, Dreamcast just over 9. So, I mean, talk about just taking your competition and burying them in the sixth generation.
How many of us have bought more than one PlayStation 2 because their old one, the lens started going, or had to go into the guts and readjust it? I know a lot of people I know had to do that.
I had to open up my PS2 and readjust the lens, but I still have my original PS2.
Yeah.
The only system I've ever had to go into to fix was the Xbox 360, the Demon Machine.
I think the only time I think my PS2 laser misaligned itself, but I had it when we bought it, we bought the Best Buy Geek Squad warranty on it.
Mhm.
So we just like brought it in. It's like, hey, this thing's acting up. And like, okay, we'll look at it give us a couple hours. And like a couple hours later, it's like, yeah, your thing's too far. We're just gonna give you a new PS2. And that's
Yeah.
pretty much what they did.
But I just remember the lens problem being something that a lot of people dealt with. But it's one of those things that it stands to say a lot about the cinema, like how both the library and the quality of the games is, for some people that will have just been like, well, I'm done with the system. But a lot of people wanted it fixed, or they just went and bought a new system, like the system over again, because they liked it that much.
And the part of the issue was that was the first system where we had the DVD playback.
Mm-hmm.
But the laser they used is only rated for a couple thousand hours of use, because when you use it to play a video game, it's not in constant use. It's like if you play a video game for 2 hours, you might only be using that laser for 20 minutes of it.
Yeah.
If you watch a DVD for 2 hours, that laser's in use for 2 hours. So people who watched a lot of DVDs especially would start having issues with their lasers because they were wearing out way faster than the creators had intended.
And not only that, but because of the reverse compatibility as well, I've had I have a unique experience because I repair systems, and I'll go to garage sales and pick up old PS2s that would no longer work. And so many of them would be able to read 1/3 of their abilities. So like they would not be able to read a PS1 game or not be able to read a DVD, but be able to read a PS2 game. And it was like, it's like such a strange, like, I can't even number how many times I've seen that, like with the older model PS2s. So it's like, it's a really strange feature, but yeah, to go back to what we were saying before about like the people like wanting to get it repaired, it just kind of speaks again to like really there was no other options because of what happened with Sega and the fact that Nintendo was kind of just relying on their handheld market at this time, and they weren't really like too involved in the console market.
Mm-hmm.
It's I remember just when I had to, because when I had that lens issue, I just remember going, fuck, I don't have $200 to blow to buy another PS2. I need to fix this.
Yep.
Mine happened right as the Slim model started dropping in price significantly, so to go there, like it was like the price comparison was much the same.
Yeah, it was, at the, I remember when mine failed, I was living on Cape Cod at that point and working at Walmart, and I'm like, that $200 is 1/3 of my Walmart wages. I can't.
I remember those days.
I can't blow 1/3 of my paycheck on a new console. I'm trying to save money so that I can get the fuck out of my family's house. So
I was lucky because I was a late adopter. I didn't get a PS2 until the Slim model came out, and I still have that Slim model. It's actually the one I use on my speedruns. But yeah, I never had to really deal with those issues beyond once I started like purchasing them, secondhand through garage sales and repairing them that way. But
so drifting back into some of the games. Just there was a series that I remember very fondly, which you're not going to really find on a lot of best of PlayStation, best of PS2 lists, but I love it for as confusing and as convoluted as it is. And it's not Kingdom Hearts,
Xenosaga?
It's Xenosaga, and
oh jeez,
Yeah.
wow.
like
I currently own 10 PS2 games, and Xenosaga's 2 of them.
I do own the entire trilogy, and I absolutely loved it. It was
I wouldn't say Xenosaga's a bad game from a gameplay standpoint.
Give us your hot take, Ron. Don't hold back.
just the fact that they had so many cutscenes was
Yeah, it's a cutscene simulator.
yeah, and this is a time when cutscenes were not really skippable either.
They were in the first game, not so much the second game. They put that back in the third. But yeah, I mean that's definitely a common criticism was the not only just the number of cutscenes but the length of some of them.
Let's see. I'm on how long to beat right now, just so I can look at the game at what PS2 games I own. Xenosaga Episode 1 is rated 81%. Xenosaga Episode 2 is rated 68%. I can't imagine that the unskippable cutscenes are not part of that drop.
Yeah, it's very likely. I mean, and as I said, if you're not paying real close attention, you can get lost very, very quickly because
even if you are paying attention, there's some of the technical babble they throw at you can kind of go over your head, and you're like, "Wait, what?"
I mean, that's just the Xeno franchise, period.
True, but it's still a thing that like.
Some of that also could be the fact that Yasunori Mitsuda is the composer for Episode 1 and is not for Episode 2.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, because now we're getting into my wheelhouse of RPGs, part of the reason it took me so long to get a PS2 was going from SNES into PlayStation was like a golden age of RPGs, where some of the best RPGs of all time came out on those two systems.
Yeah, and I'll throw in there that's having not had the PlayStation, missing that generation, going back for RPGs was a big selling point.
Yeah. For me, like, going into the PS2, there wasn't really anything that made me want to jump into the system. I heard one of my friends was into Xenosaga, and he showed me a little bit of it, and I went, this is absolute nonsense. I've since played it, Brian, but that was from seeing 5 minutes of the middle of the game, it was absolute nonsense.
Oh yeah, I mean,
I knew nothing of the Persona series at that point, which that was a big draw if you got into that series, because that's where you have Persona 3 and 4 originally. What eventually got me to buy a PS2 was Final Fantasy X.
So to counterpoint to what you're saying about at the beginning of the PS2's launch cycle, this may be why. Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 came out October 2001. Grand Theft Auto 3 came out October 2001. Metal Gear Solid 2 came out November 2001. Devil May Cry came out October 2001. Those are 4 immensely influential non-RPG games that permeated the market and created tons of clones and took directions of
I feel like
RPGs
weren't a thing on the PS2 until later in its lifespan.
The first notable RPG I can think of on the PS2 is Dark Cloud.
Ooh.
Yeah. That's the one I still haven't played, but I've heard things.
Yeah, I mean, and Spencer's absolutely right. You had those 4 games. That was the first year anniversary of the PS2. So you had those massively popular and heavy hitters for its, first year holiday window there.
Everybody was broke.
Yeah.
Broke.
Also, yeah, because let's also mention the PS2 at the time at launch was $600.
Mm-hmm.
And people were fine with it because it was both a console and a DVD player.
And DVD players were expensive back then.
Yeah.
You could pay that much for a DVD player.
Yeah, DVD player. Yeah, for a halfway decent one.
Oh, you know what? Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance came out in December of 2001, so that was another early RPG. Although most people probably would be playing that on PC.
No, that's the thing. I was moving into PC at that point, and that's where I ended up playing that.
Yep.
But I will say, one thing I appreciate for the PS2 come later were some of the games as art that we got, because this was the originator of both Shadow of the Colossus and Okami.
Oh, Okami! How did I miss that one?
And,
Yeah,
What's wrong with you, Doug?
Eco as well as
It's
part of
Eco,
the Shadow Colossus thing.
The prelude to other RPGs on the PS2. It's Disgaea started out began on the PS2.
Yep.
And as we mentioned earlier, Persona. This is where we got Persona 3 and 4, which was really when the Persona series took off in America. Well, we got 1 and the first half of 2. Neither of those sold particularly well.
Yeah. Other things, we also had Dragon Quest VIII on the PS2, and that's probably what made Dragon Quest take off in America. Well, not take off, but
it was
notable.
the reintroduction point, really, of the franchise to the American audience.
And that was my introduction to Dragon Quest. Was that game,
which is amusing. Which is amusing when you consider that you could have bought like Dragon Quest 1, 2, and 7 already in America.
But I got it for free for subscribing to Nintendo Power, man. I'm an original Dragon Warrior, man.
He is.
Here's the thing.
I still have the cart.
Here's a big one that we haven't talked about yet. How about that little series? I mean, I know most people haven't heard of it, but Kingdom Hearts. I've heard that that's doing pretty well right now.
Depends on who you ask, I guess. But.
Yeah. For those who are unaware, I just like you hear Kingdom Hearts now, and you like Disney working with Square. How is this even going to work? We were asking the same question in 2003.
But that's where 2002.
2002, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. I literally have it in front of me right now. It's the only reason I know.
Yeah,
but I mean, Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 were PS2?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. So,
and
I mean, that's big. Like,
yeah, and the thing that the reason why that title took off as much as it did was Kingdom Hearts 1 laid down a pretty decent groundwork foundation for a decent gameplay system. It also was riding on the high of anime graphics and anime styling at that time, which was like the thing to do for a lot of games in the PS2 era. And then Kingdom Hearts 2 went like full anime, like, and at that time people were just lapping it up.
Yeah, I mean, those are two great games, and now I just sigh.
That was 2 great games and Chain of Memories.
Okay.
I'm not gonna lie, I couldn't get past the first game. Donald was too much of a deterrent for me to want to continue playing after the first installment.
I mean, I get it.
I was just too rage filled. I'll eventually give the pinnacle 2 and 3. I'll eventually try. I don't want to delve into the whole permutations of different spin-offs and all the extra games like that. People try to explain that to me, and my brain just starts to melt out of my ears. And I'm just like,
don't think about it too hard, or blood will shoot out your nose.
See, it's wonderful to me. I haven't even played many of the games, but I've read up on the lore and watched videos of them, and I come from anime where shit that's convoluted and nonsense is the best. So
no, don't get me wrong. I'm a huge Evangelion fan, so I totally understand that. But at the same time, if my first experience is negative, I'm not going to want to, adhere myself to more of it.
Oh no, I'm agreeing. It is absolute bullshit nonsense. It's just that bullshit nonsense apparently appeals to me because of my anime genes.
Another RPG during this time was Star Ocean Till the End of Time.
Yep. Yes, it was.
I mean, I
have no experience with that Star Ocean game, so that's as far as it goes.
Yeah. You're just like, yeah, that's a game.
Yeah, that's a game.
Same. I have no Star Ocean experience.
My wife just took a week off so she can play the first Star Ocean game with me because I've never played the series before.
The thing with
enjoy.
Star Ocean Till the End of Time is they do a certain story break element to try and make things be like a gigantic shock to the system, or like a shock to the game, when it kind of didn't need to go in that particular direction. And you'll note that any future Star Ocean game does not proceed after Till the End of Time, because they have a timeline, and the timeline is a bit weird with it. But
So like they're like, our timeline's so bullshit, we're not even going to use it anymore.
No, more in the sense of when the games get released, trying to pin them down in the timeline, it's a little weird. The only thing that's really concrete is Star Ocean Till the End of Time is the end of the Star Ocean timeline, because no game has come out past that, and I feel it's partially due to the bullshit story thing they did in Star Ocean Till the End of Time.
Yeah, it sounds about right. I mean, speaking of RPGs, another reason that I ended up picking up this was for Chrono Cross. AKA the predecessor of every gacha game that you play on your mobile device.
I mean...
That and Suikoden.
I mean,
Chrono Cross was PS1, but...
Yeah.
Point. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's PS1. I even have a copy of it, and it's on my PS2 list. I don't know why my brain...
It's very late PS1. It's like it's 2000, so
it was the reason I bought a PS2, because I didn't own a PS1.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, so you know,
Chrono Cross was the first PS game I played on a PS2.
okay,
So,
there you go.
you know, you're not alone in that.
I mean, so you know, you were talking about, you know, sort of this golden age of RPGs. PS2, and I think this is the thing I'm going to close with, because we're about an hour into the first half already. Also, PS2 continuing on the success of the PS1, a golden age of survival horror.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it was just the hits just kept coming. Silent Hill 2 and 3, Resident Evil Code Veronica are the three that stick out most in my brain. I mean,
wasn't Code Veronica originally a Dreamcast title that was then ported to the PS2?
It was ported over to the PS2 and made better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm just give Dreamcast credit for what it deserves on its grave. Just lay the games on top.
Yep. I mean, I eventually played both, but I did play the PS2 version first. So, and you know, I'm also a huge Silent Hill fan. So, I mean, I loved the first game on the PS1, and I'm like, come on, more. And 2 and 3 for just like memories, and then the series dive bombed. So, then the series just went right into the freaking toilet. But I will always have nostalgia, and you know, they've made an HD. The PS3 made an HD collection of 2 and 3. So we mentioned Devil May Cry, which, you know, survival horror, but with much different themes, much more action oriented.
They had several of the Legacy of Kain games.
Yep.
Came out here.
For people who complain about how Resident Evil 4 changed the franchise, just think of how bad Resident Evil 4 would have changed the franchise if it actually ended up being like Devil May Cry, which is one of the permutations of Resident Evil 4. It's
that was
so. We would have an even more action-oriented Resident Evil franchise if things had gone a little differently.
Yeah, I love the story behind that, because, you know, Capcom was making Devil May Cry. I mean, it wasn't called Devil May Cry yet. It was like, this was going to be Resident Evil 4. And then they realized just how divergent from the Resident Evil, quote-unquote, formula they were going, and they're like, no, this is going to be its own separate game. And then
they made one of their biggest series, at least at the time.
And then I'm kind of glad they did, because I think that would have been too drastic I mean, Final Fantasy, Resident Evil 4 was already vastly different from anything they had done in the series to that point. I can't imagine massive tests of reflexes, Leon Kennedy. You already had quick time events in Resident Evil 4 that I died a million times on. I couldn't imagine.
I mean, the other thing we had coming into this, we mentioned a little earlier, but we didn't really dive into, was Final Fantasy X, which was basically the second coming of Final Fantasy VII for how many people got into the franchise at that point.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, you had the 10, 2, 11, and 12.
Yeah.
So
as many people got into that franchise because of 10 as 7.
Not to backtrack too hard, I just wanted to mention this real quick before we move on from Resident Evil 4. One of the biggest coups that the PlayStation 2 did was taking Resident Evil 4 from exclusivity off the GameCube.
Yes.
That was like one of the biggest things, like, you know, that's when that's when PlayStation was like, no. PlayStation became the bully at that point.
Yeah.
Like when they stole that from the GameCube. But yeah, go on. I just wanted to mention that.
Just one last thing on that, because I remember also being a GameCube owner myself at that point. I had a GameCube and a PS2. Well, I remember the announcement that Capcom was going to make Resident Evil Nintendo exclusive. And all of the Nintendo fanboys were like, yes! And then Resident Evil 0, the remake of 1 and 4 came out on the GameCube, and then, you know, sales were shit on the GameCube, so Capcom Sony went, so you were saying about that exclusivity, Capcom.
And 2 of those games are classics.
Yeah. So,
and then Resident Evil 0.
It's not that the games were bad, it's just the market penetration was literally a sixth of what Sony had.
That was exactly it.
Well, I mean, that and it didn't really fit the audience that Nintendo had cultivated up to that point.
Like,
no.
And
the irony being that the port of Resident Evil 4 to the PlayStation 2 is a highly inferior product.
Yep.
Which is just hilarious to me in every way.
Yep. But it had assignment Ada on it, which was not on the GameCube original.
Yes.
So, all right, back to you, Ronny.
I was just going to say, I said there weren't a lot of RPGs on here, but the big exception there is Final Fantasy X. I mean, Final Fantasy X was, whether you like it or not, because it's not my favorite in the series, but it was absolutely freaking revolutionary and standard breaking in a lot of ways, and it kind of set the tone for RPGs going forward.
It was a beautiful game. It was a wonderfully bittersweet story.
Yep.
And it drew a lot of people in, and we started to see this in the previous one, but this is where, because you could have, basically full-on voice acting the entire time, people really starting to get attached to story in RPGs in a way that they, without just text. And it did change a lot of stuff. I mean, I remember playing that game the first time, and it just, because I was that was 2001, so I was still angry high school kid. My mother had died 2 years before that, very suddenly, and I just remember being an emotional wreck when I got to that ending. But it was one of the first ones to really change that, because you could do so much more.
Yeah.
So on one hand, you could argue that you lose a little bit of the imagination by having it all people talk instead of, reading the dialogue and putting in your own imagination. But at the same time, you could also say that hearing inflection adds a new element to it as well. So,
no, that's a good point, because the PS2 is really when voice acting starts to become more of a legitimate aspect of video games and less a luxury expenditure that only guys like Kojima would want to do on a PS1 or something like that, in the PS1 era.
Yep.
There's so many games that have phenomenal voice acting talent in it in the PS2.
And also, well, you could also argue soundtracks like getting much more. This is when you start seeing like fully orchestrated soundtracks and things like that too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I want to mention a game that might not be as known to everyone, but I think is probably one of the better GTA sandbox style gameplay element action games out there. The Spider-Man 2 movie game that was released. That game is like secretly one of the best games on the system, and if you've never played it, I would absolutely recommend it. It is a fantastic like Grand Theft Auto sandbox style game with like all the elements of Spider-Man that any
that's the one where you can go in and punch Mysterio and instantly kill him because he has no health actually.
Yep, and like you can do like pizza missions or like
it's the one I'm thinking of.
Spider-Man 2 is Spider-Man 2 is the Spider-Man game that everyone says held up for the longest time as like the pinnacle of like superhero games for the longest time, and it wasn't until the new Spider-Man came out. So
the developers of the new Spider-Man game like explicitly stated that they used a lot of the swinging elements like and physics from that game in their models because they felt it was like some of the best web swinging in any like game period.
You can see that DNA in the PS4 Spider-Man. You can also see that DNA in, of all things, the Lego Marvel games where you have the open world.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of little missions and things like that too playing around. And the hub is kind of wandering around New York City.
So, Doug, I know you have to get going soon, so we'll end the first half with you.
Just one last franchise I wanted to bring up that again, is another one I'm kicking myself for not mentioning sooner. Ratchet and Clank.
Yeah, you had some excellent platformers on there, and you had Ratchet and Clank and Jack and Daxter. Yeah,
Jack and Daxter.
Naughty Dogs. Just that. Like, I remember thinking that thing was like so cartoony, and then a friend kind of basically like sat me down. It's like, no, you have to try this. It's a lot of fun, and it's a wonderfully goofy series, and that franchise started on the PlayStation 2, which. Again, it's crazy to think about all these ones started in this generation on this system.
It was unfortunately it was one of those platformers that I missed when initially during the PS2's heyday, but as I've been playing more and more platformers of late, this is one that I've been wanting to dive back, go back a bit and see about picking up and playing.
It holds up pretty well. I went back to one of them recently.
So, all right. Anything else more you wanted to say, Doug? Before you cut out?
No. Thanks for having me back. It's been a blast, and PlayStation 2 had some amazing stuff, and now I'm regretting that I don't have time to go play Katamari or Akami again.
You have to find the time. All right. Well. Thank you so much, Doug, for being on, and we'll talk to you soon. All right, so with that fun note, we're going to bring the first half to a close. When we jump back on the second half, we'll talk about more games, more memories, more fond nostalgia, for better or worse. So you are listening to our 20th anniversary of the PlayStation 2 retrospective here on Downloadable Content. We'll be back. Welcome back, everyone, to Downloadable Content, talking about the PS2 as it hits its 20th anniversary. We're all now here, minus Doug. Doug got rolled up into a ball somewhere and is
Turn into a star.
Yep, he's gone. He's up there. We will never forget you, Doug. But the four of us still remain. So, we've brought up a lot of classics. We've talked about some RPGs, some survival horror, some racing, just a bit of some platformers, a mishmash of everything. Now we're going to open the second half talking about some of our more memorable fighting games that were on the PS2, because there were a bunch. There were definitely a bunch, and I'm going to actually hand this off to Spencer to start us off.
A lot of my experience with this console is fighting games, and actually the original intent of my purchase of a PS2 was to play Soul Calibur 3 in a competitive nature, and I created a lot of friends throughout the fighting scene, playing in the MLG tournaments, and like Tekken, Virtua Fighter, Guilty Gear, Soul Calibur, Capcom versus SNK, Guilty Gear, all these great fighters all coming out like within like the same time frame, and they're all like super refined. Like no matter what your taste of fighting genre, the PlayStation 2 had the best version of it without question.
Yeah, I mean, that was, you're talking, Soul Calibur 3 I had Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance, and there were, again, another several franchises just where you just sank tons of hours. I didn't play competitively like you did, but Soul Calibur 3 came out in October 2005.
Another important thing to mention in terms of like the PlayStation's 2 permanence, Soul Calibur 2 was a triple console release. It came out GameCube, PlayStation 2, Xbox. Soul Calibur 3 was PlayStation 2 exclusive. That's like an enormous change for the franchise to go from 3 consoles to 1 in just one game like difference.
Yeah.
And just shows like how much the PlayStation 2 had just dominated the market, that the company was like, we'll make more money making sure this game runs perfectly on the PS2 than putting it on 3 systems and, making a little money on the other 2 consoles, still making the most money on the PlayStation 2 anyways. Go ahead.
Yeah, you talk about Soul Calibur 2, and it's like, I just remember that you had the 3 different versions. Each one had its own unique character. Like, the GameCube one had Link. The PlayStation 2 version had
Heihachi from Tekken.
And was the Xbox one Spawn?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that one was the pre-Smash hype release, because at the time no one knew what were they going to do for Xbox, because Xbox didn't have all these established characters that you could draw from like the other 2 consoles did.
Yep. So
obviously most people thought it was going to be Link for Nintendo because it just made the most sense. He has a sword. It's a sword fighting game. It's just easy 1-to-1, just bang. And Heihachi makes sense because it's, Namco makes both franchises, and the combat systems are very similar. So the transition from a coding standpoint will be very easy to do, even though he doesn't use a weapon. But, Spawn being the Xbox game was whoa. And I know multiple people who got an Xbox for that version because they wanted to play as Spawn. And, playing Spawn, it was fun. He was a really well-built character, and it was actually kind of a shame that he was limited to the Xbox version.
But I just remember playing Soul Calibur 3 and eventually buying it, and just because I had been used to I had played the original Soul Calibur on an arcade console, and then a friend had it for Dreamcast, and then just the controls were so much more precise. You know, just and this was true for PlayStation 2 in general. Just like the leap in technology, not just visually but also just controller response was so good.
Yeah, again, it's speaking to what I was speaking of before, but in a different way. With fighting games now, they don't have to decide between like visuals or like combat fluidity. They can have really good visuals and have a really fluid combat experience. That's why you have like all these different kinds of fighting games. Like, you know, Soul Calibur is very slow paced, defensive, kind of like poke prod, you know, chess match kind of style, while like a game like Marvel vs. Capcom, where it's like really fast-paced, high-moving, lots of moving parts. Like the screen is filled with combat everywhere. You know, you've got like 2 assists going, and then like 3 explosions, and your guys like teleporting backwards and sliding under, and you know the whole screen is just like filled with stuff going on. And you know they have like these 2 spectrum ends and everything in between.
Did you? Then we had the 2 Tekken games that came out for PS2. You had Tekken 4 and 5.
Yep.
Which
we also
I never
go
played.
ahead.
I never played those.
Yeah, I honestly I was on Soul Cal. That was, you know, again, like I said before, they're very similar games in terms of like the game engine. Sorry, words. The engines are very similar. They just have different combat mechanics because the one is hand-to-hand combat versus, you know, Soul Calibur being the, you know, like weapon-based fighter.
Mm-hmm.
But then you had like the what's so crazy is like we talk about Tekken. Then you have Tekken's like immediate competition in Virtua Fighter coming out on the PlayStation 2 as well. You know. So here's like Sega's flagship fighting franchise coming out on Sony's system.
Uh-huh.
Which is like, that was like a huge thing when that happened, because it was like, wow, okay.
Yep. You know, with the Dreamcast dead, Sega wasn't going to, like, yeah, they may have pulled out of the console market, but they still had their own flagship franchises.
And that's kind of part of the problem too for Sega, is like, not only was the console market gone for them, the arcade market was basically non-existent at this point. So both of their like pillar points of, you know, financial dominance was pretty much irrelevant in the market.
Yep. I had spent a lot of time playing Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance as well. I think that was that and Armageddon were the 2 main ones for PS2, but I never played Armageddon because after Deadly Alliance, I was like, okay, but the series has jumped the shark. It's over, guys. Let's move on. I'm glad I was wrong, and they decided to reboot the entire series, and you know, with the 9th Mortal Kombat game on PS3, and that brought me right back in. So good on them. But at this point, I'm like, yeah, this game, this franchise is going bye-bye. It's dying a slow death.
Yeah, it just went into hibernation. It needed to, you know, take some time and, you know, reevaluate itself and realize its faults and, you know, accept its new role in the market. And it just, you know, took them some time. But the other point of, like, the counter to all these, you know, we're talking about all these traditional fighting games. There are tons of really good wrestling games as well for the PlayStation 2. And, like, I would argue probably has some of the best wrestling games that I've played. Now, I don't have as much experience with these kind of games as some other people would.
It was also during the heyday of when wrestling was relatively at one of the higher peaks, I would say.
That's true.
So the wrestling games that was something I missed entirely, utterly. But you know, Ronny, I know you're a huge fan of wrestling. So so any games? Did you jump on any of those games?
I did not, because as I said, I for the most part skipped the PS2, and when I came back to it, It was mainly for the RPGs that came out. But one I do want to call out was the second coming of Fire Pro Wrestling in the United States, which was on the PS2. Are any of you guys familiar with the Fire Pro franchise?
Nope, sorry.
I remember I always see the box, like working at GameStop, like we always had copies of it. Not like the amount of like you would see for like, sports games that keep getting returned, but like, showing that it was popular enough, but like, obviously it was a game that like kids would be purchased for by their parents, and then when the kids didn't want their PlayStation 2 anymore and moved on, then the parents just sold all the games, and this was one of them.
Yeah. So the negative to Fire Pro is it is a ridiculously complicated game. The reason it's ridiculously complicated, though, is because it was the first game that was really trying to be simulationist to wrestling. It also has one of the most in-depth character creation systems in video games, period. You can literally, if you pick up any Fire Pro game from any generation, you can literally download thousands of wrestlers that are photo accurate to whatever small indie franchise, like not just WWE, WCW, TNA, any of those at the time. You can look up people from like Ohio Valley Wrestling, and you'll be able to pull down them exactly the way they look with their moves. It's amazing what that community is able to do with what they're given, and the amount of character creation and move creation tools that they have been given. Like, it is wonderful what they've done. And this was I believe somebody in the comments will correct me, but I believe this is the second Fire Pro game to ever come to America, was the PS2 one.
Well, let me pull up Lord Wikipedia here to see.
Yeah, I'm doing the same.
So, like, I had heard of this series, but I mean, never actually played it. So, there was a Fire Pro Wrestling that come out in North America on the Game Boy Advance.
Yep, that's the first one that I was thinking of.
Then Fire Pro Wrestling 2 was also on the Game Boy Advance.
Okay.
And then Fire Pro Wrestling Returns came out.
Was on the PS2.
Was on the PS2, and
so it was the third that came over here.
Yep, and then Fire Pro Wrestling and Fire Pro Wrestling World got. Well, Fire Pro Wrestling got an Xbox 360 release, and then Fire Pro Wrestling World got a worldwide release on Steam and PS4.
Yeah, Fire Pro Wrestling World is the one that's out right now, and that is the big one, and that is the third coming of Fire Pro Wrestling, and this is when it's finally hit it pretty fucking big. Like, it's done incredibly well. It has an incredible community, like, and a lot of that traces back to the PS2.
Which is good, because, I mean, usually when I think of pro wrestling, I think WWE. So, this is a nice little, maybe not a major mainstream title, but still a very, very active, thriving community. So,
yeah, absolutely. And if you want characters as diverse as the Shockmaster, you go to Fire Pro Wrestling.
And not only is there like the traditional wrestling games, there's the like kind of brawler style wrestling games, the Def Jam games, for example. Those were extremely popular. I remember tons of people playing those, and those being very successful in the market.
I mean, we also had a lot of really cringeworthy fighting games on the system as well, like Rumble Rose.
Oh god. Yeah, that was the Monka S for sure.
Didn't they have a isn't this where we had the celebrity deathmatch fighting game?
Yeah, and there's like the backyard wrestling games as well.
Okay, I don't think I'd heard of those.
Oh, those are some special gems for sure. I would only want those to be played by my most hated enemies. But no, one other successful fighting game franchises would be the anime fighting games that really started to take off in the PlayStation 2 with Dragon Ball and
Budokai?
Naruto. Yeah. Yep. I just like I can say like every time at an MLG event there was always people playing one of the Dragon Ball titles like on like one of the backup TVs, just like having fun with it. Like people loved those games.
I mean, and those all the way to the current day, where like that we have the Dragon Ball Z and the Jump Fighter going on right now,
Yep.
and like that lineage traces all the way back to here.
Now they have like the Karakot one that came out, which has like, you know, one of the biggest story modes in those games. Like they've really like branched out beyond just like a traditional like Smash Brothers style like, you know, like fan battle brawling game to like a real like expansive you know, true gameplay title.
What about you, Ron? Any fighting?
I was personally a fan of mostly Guilty Gear, so like Guilty Gear X2 or XX. I also remember there's also some Tekken games as well.
Yep, we mentioned that Tekken 5 and 6.
And Tekken Tag. Tekken Tag was really popular.
Oh,
as well.
I remember that. I remember Tekken Tag now. That's right.
Yeah, that was a big one in the community for sure. I love watching Guilty Gear, but I was like the combat system was just like too complicated and fast for me to grasp properly, so like I could never play it well.
It's been simplified a little bit since then, but it's still a little. It looks pretty, which is probably like the biggest selling point for if you're a fan of like the anime art style.
Oh yeah, no, it's such a beautiful game. Like the way that they do the backgrounds or the sprites over the backgrounds. It's just like, like I said, I love watching it. It's such a great game to watch if you're not like skilled enough to do it well in a competitive standpoint, at least.
Mm-hmm.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we had any main Street Fighter games.
Street Fighter EX, I think, somewhere around here. There was a Street Fighter EX3 in 2000.
Like, I remember there was an anniversary collection that came out for the PS2, but I don't recall, because Street Fighter 3 came out in 97, and then Street Fighter 4 was PS3.
Yeah, no, there really wasn't much. The franchise was kind of just existing on arcades for the most part at that point. Beyond, you know, like 3 and everything, but like I remember people just playing, like, it's just First Strike. That's all people would play, which was the PS1 game. Like, and this is like, you know, 2005, people are still playing First Strike for Street Fighter in terms of like competitive play. Like that was the game. So it was just like, you know how Street Fighter does. They release their title and then they're like, edition. You know.
Yeah.
80 editions later, you know, it's still the third game, but there's like 15 of them out there.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking to the 8 versions of Street Fighter 2. But dear God. So any more on the fighting games before we move right along?
The last one the last genre of them that I'll mention is the Godzilla monster battle style of fighting games. Those are low-key popular with like the monster fan community, and like, you know, it's just they're very good brawler games, you know.
Having like War of the Monsters.
Well, there's a bunch. There's like Godzilla Save the Earth, the War of the Monsters, the one that you said. And then like those there are titles on other consoles as well. But for the GameCube, for the PS2, those are the ones that stand out the most in my memory, at least.
For a second, you were talking about that. My brain immediately thought like Rampage, like those types. But no.
Oh yeah, no, not no.
just no.
Nah. Get it off my tongue. No.
Oh. All right. So moving back along, because I had to during the break I grabbed my binder of video game discs and going, what the hell other PlayStation 2 games did I own? And we've kind of mentioned them all, and there was the PlayStation 2 library is so huge that there were a lot of games I wanted to get into but never bought, never owned, and I might have to rectify some of that, like going back to RPGs for a bit, the Dot Hack series.
Yeah, that was probably one of the. I would say that's probably like one of the biggest series I remember playing back then. Was spending like 40 hours each game, playing like each iteration, because there was both. It was like the Dot Hack series, and then you had Dot Hack. Like there was a
GU.
Yeah, GU. Thank you.
Like, there were 5 games for the Dot Hack series, and all of them were on PS2.
Yeah.
And just, like, I don't know why that series hasn't continued, beyond PS2, but...
They kind of burned their own community out. With how much
developer for that franchise?
I mean, the developer was CyberConnect 2, and it was published by Bandai.
Well, Bandai
they were the group that was working on that FF7 remake.
Bandai did merge with Namco,
yes.
So maybe that had something to do with it. Maybe Namco was like, meh. We don't like this.
The thing too with the Dot Hack series was it was also a push during a time of wanting anime in like all forms. So they did like a multi-release thing where they had like an anime series, and then they had the game series, and they had some comics and books.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm talking about. They burned their own community out. I know this from being in the anime community. Dot Hack was goddamn everywhere. They made it as a simultaneous release between the anime series of Dot Hack Sign, the video game series, and the manga. And they never stopped. They had multiple anime series, OAVs, multiple manga series, several video game series. Like, Dot Hack, in a short period of time, made a market, oversaturated that market, and killed itself.
Okay.
Yeah, it was pretty...
Well, now I know.
I was say I just looked it up. Here's what we have for Dot Hack. We have a full 24 episode, I believe, anime series, a mini and a multi-episode OAV, the DVD OAVs that were included with each of the games, and another OAV series. Then they had 5 different novel series, as well as the Legend of the Twilight manga. Then we get to the video games, where you have the original video game series, the GU video game series, the Dot Hack Link PSP game, the Versus Dot Hack games, the Guilty Dragon games. While those didn't come here, those were exclusive to Japan. And then we get into more anime series, Roots, the 2 GU series, Quantum, the movie, Thanatos Reports, then more novels, and then 7 more mangas.
And this is over. Keep in mind, this is like 2002 and 2006.
So I hear you like Dot Hack.
All I can think of is the Simpsons meme where it's like, stop it, he's already dead.
You like Dot Hack? We got Doc Hack. We got Doc Hack for you. Like they had a great idea with that multi-pronged approach, and they made this whole continuity here where if you are into it, there's all this material for you. But they did it way too much, way too fast, and burned out their audience. If they'd gone a little bit slower, we might still be having Dot Hack to this day.
Meanwhile, then you have something like Xenosaga, which was supposed to be a 6-game series, and it only wound up being 3.
Was it directed by George Lucas?
No.
Or was it?
Dun, dun, dun!
Find out next time on DLC.
We're going to start on the 4th episode, then move on, then we're going to jump backwards, and then forwards again.
Yes.
And then
That's
jump back.
exactly what they do with Xenosaga.
And then jump backwards after we jump forwards.
Yes.
But then you have to go forward to go back.
Where does Xenogears fit on that timeline, Ryan?
Hell if I know.
I'm fucking with you.
I know. It's still hell if I know.
I believe they said that Xenogears was going to be reworked into the 7th game in the series, but it would have major changes since they couldn't use the same IP stuff. But if they were allowed to use the IP, it would have been number 7 in the. Well,
the first series. They would have had to finish the game, then make this. I
was gonna say a franchise that we haven't talked about yet. I don't know. It might be a little too niche. Zone of the Enders.
That's not niche. I mean, that was a game that I.
AKA the game that people played for only because it had Metal Gear Solid 2 on it. That's like the main reason I think people played it.
Hey, people like mechas.
Yeah, no, it was a good game too. It was just sad that
I think the second one stands out a little bit more, honestly, than the first one, but they're both high quality games.
I think the anime is better than the games, so go play that.
Play the anime?
Yes, on your system. On your PS2, it can play DVDs.
I see what you did there.
Damn you!
No. I mean, we have the games that obviously were sort of must-haves and must-plays for the PS2, but we all have our own memories, our own things, personal games that we liked or disliked for PS2, and Zone of the Enders. I remember hearing a ton about that. I mean, it got an HD shiny and it got a remaster. At least the second runner did.
Yeah. I was gonna say the second one got the more popular. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna say before we go any farther. Remember how you were talking about the anime fighting games, and you mentioned Naruto?
Yes.
That's what CyberConnect 2 was up to after Dot Hack. They did all of the Naruto fighting games from the PS2 era to now.
Now that we've saturated the market with anime, let's saturate the market with anime.
So I hear you like anime.
I'm looking at their Wikipedia page. They made 2 games before Dot Hack, and then from 2002 to 2011, every single game they did either is Naruto or Dot Hack. Every game. Then after that, there's a couple other games mixed in between the Dot Hack and Naruto games.
Just to spice things up a little bit.
They've literally done dozens of both Naruto and Dot Hack games. Those are their franchises.
And Spencer, we have also been utterly remiss. We haven't mentioned Metal Gear Solid 3. That's my favorite of the series.
Well, I know that that there's some negativity towards the series, so I wasn't going to dig too deep into it. But yeah, I mean
they're wrong.
obviously,
Me?
obviously the two Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 like are bookmarks on the PS2's life. Like the Metal Gear Solid 2 showed what the PS2 was like capable of as like a release game, and then Metal Gear Solid 3 basically stretched the PS2 to the like absolute limits of its processing capabilities. Like whenever I play 3, running through the grass right in the beginning of the game, it's like the PlayStation is like help me, and it's like running at like 10 FPS or some ridiculously low number because it's just like there's so much going on. What do I do?
I mean, Metal Gear Solid 3 again, my favorite of the series, and just how quickly it came out after 2, because there was a 3-year gap. So, Metal Gear Solid 2 came out in 2001, 3 came out in 2004. So it was just like, whoa, that was a 3.
And what's even more impressive about that is like, originally Kojima wasn't even supposed to be the director for 3, so he actually had to come in and redo and retake over. So they did all that in that time frame, which is what's even more impressive about it. Is like he came up with this concept and brought his concept to life like in a very short time frame.
Absolutely, and just I remember just the graphical jump just with it 2 to 3, and just how pretty and immersive that game is, and using other hardware features of the PS2 that not a lot of games took advantage of, like the game's internal clock or the system's internal clock.
Right. Yes.
Particularly, with your inventory in that game, like the animals that you would hunt for food, you turn off the game and you don't come back to it for a while, all that food rots. And
yes.
Which is just holy shit. To use the system's clock as a core gameplay element, that was just amazing and just absolutely brilliant, if frustrating as you're playing the game.
It really does a very good job of taking all of the different aspects of the like sneaking that it uses between like the camouflage and the medical and the food and the like the upgrading in the both the actual sneaking, the CQC, as well as like the Subsistence remake version that has the free roam camera versus the traditional fixed cameras on the original release.
Mm-hmm.
That difference is really what I think makes the game the best in the franchise, because if you only play 3 with the OG locked fixed position camera, it's almost a different game, to be honest with you. It plays very differently. And I think the free roam cam takes better advantage of all the tools that you're given in the game between all the weapons and items and camouflage and the food.
Yes. That is such a complete game. And
not to mention it's probably Kojima's most cohesive plot. Not that that's really saying much, but it's at least, you can follow it.
Yeah, I can't refute that at all. That's just, I actually was able to follow the story from beginning to end and not go, what the fuck did I just play?
You mean watch?
I also, yes.
No, you don't play Metal Gear Solid. It plays you.
It plays you. It's just yeah. I totally get that, and just because I remember just how immersed into this game I was, and by the end of the game being in floods of tears because it's Snake goes through such hell.
That ending is so dirty. How they do that and make you have to pull the trigger is like so wrong and so perfect.
Oh yeah, it was a perfect ending, but it didn't. I was like ugly sobbing throughout that entire ending sequence.
Me and my roommate was playing it and I was watching him, and we watched that ending and then just went to the bar and just got hammered. Like somber, depressed drinking, where we're just like silently drinking at the bar. Like the bartender's just like...
That was a thing.
Yeah, we were just like, what the fuck was that? Oh my god. It was such a crazy way to end that game.
But given how the rest of the series shakes out, it worked. I mean, Metal Gear Solid 3 for me is a solid contender for one of my absolute all-time favorite games.
Oh, for sure. For me as well. I think for me it's Chrono Trigger and then it's Metal Gear Solid 3.
So just
those are my two big ones.
It was
you've listed one of my favorite and least favorite games. It's amazing. I'm sorry, the Metal Gear Solid series makes me bored.
It's not for everyone.
Yeah,
I will acknowledge
I started
that.
playing,
it is not for everyone.
I started playing Metal Gear Solid 1 for the podcast, for that retrospective episode, because I was going to give an outsider's opinion going into it, and I couldn't get through the goddamn game.
Oh yeah, I remember the Facebook messages. You're like, Brian, I can't. I just can't.
The one thing I'll say about 1, even though it's not PS2, it's like that one is the backtracking in 1 specifically is so frustrating because it seems like it's just padding.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, the sniper rifle's at the like first room in the game. Go get it, dumbass. Ha 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 ha. And you're like, what? You really have to run all the way back there for this gun that you could just like put wherever you want?
The funny thing is that when we played it at the time, we weren't, most of us, at least I wasn't going, really? It was just like, okay, just we'll play the game. Now, playing it again for that retrospective, just how annoying those things are now. Like the whole idea of fetch quests have just turned me right the fuck off.
Right, and that's why I feel like 3 is the pinnacle of the series, because it has the best balance between gameplay and story. Some of the games do the gameplay a little bit better, but the story is significantly worse, and some of the games have more, like in-depth or like deep story, but the gameplay isn't as precise and cohesive as it is in 3.
I was gonna say, you guys don't have to try to argue the series to me. I understand why people love it. It's just, it'll never be one for me.
Totally.
Personally, I've only played the Metal Gear Solid 5 Phantom Pain, or whatever that one's called.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the only one I played, and like that's all I felt I needed to play.
Yeah. I mean, I've played the first one and I could not get through it, and I've seen the second and third one played. I actually saw those two played before I played the first one.
That could speak to it, because I myself also started with 3 and then played 1 and 2 afterwards, and it's the first 2 games are definitely clunkier if you start out with 3 or later's like more fluid sneaking and like combat mechanics.
I didn't like 2 or 3 either.
All right.
I started with 2 or 3, and then I was hoping, okay, maybe I will be more engaged in this game if I actually play it, and I was wrong.
Again,
well,
not
then
for everyone.
You play the NES ones, and then really torture yourself.
Oh, yeah.
I have played the NES one. It wasn't better, but it wasn't hyped to me either. So,
what do you mean you don't feel asleep? So, continuing on that sort of stealth vein, Sly Cooper.
Oh
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus, which was the first in that franchise, which sort of combined both some platforming and stealth. Coming out in 2002. I remember some of the ads for this game. Just this whole. It looked like it was hand-drawn animation, and this was another game that I wanted to play. That you got some pretty good reviews, but it was just. I remember that even then people were complaining, "Oh, this game's too short." I don't know what the cutoff there, but that was, it was definitely popular enough to warrant 3 additional games.
Yeah.
Wow, 3? I didn't realize there were that many.
Yep.
Yeah, then they jumped to the PS3, I believe, and then I think they died around then, if memory serves.
Yeah, you had the original, then you had Sly 2 Band of Thieves, which was also PS2, and then you had Sly 3 Honor Among Thieves, also PS2, and then Thieves in Time, which was PS3. And that was the most recent game. So the first 3 games were released as got HD shiny and was released on PS3. Also, along the lines of like the stealth games, we had, I think, at least one Splinter Cell game. I seem to remember Chaos Theory.
I believe Rainbow Six also had a couple of games during this time too. And then your Call of Duties and your well, actually, I would say the PS2 is probably when Call of Duty becomes like a more of a noteworthy franchise.
Yeah, because like Big Red 1 is kind of where the series takes off from the in terms of popularity. The first couple of games didn't really stick, but once Big Red 1 came out, those like World War II, like very linear-esque early Call of Duty style games were pretty popular for a while until, obviously the modern warfare era began.
It was just funny because, you're talking about the Call of Duty series, and it's like the first 2 games came out they were PC. PC, Xbox, and Xbox 360 and PS3. Call of Duty was the first one on PS2.
Yeah.
So, like, wait, what?
In terms of another very important shooter that didn't become popular until later, Red Dead Revolver.
Ooh.
A sneaky good PS2 game that I always enjoy going back to. It's a very linear game. It doesn't have the open worldness that the Red Dead Redemption franchise games have, but it's got that. It's got all the like combat, like where you could see where the like skeleton of the combat is born, and like the gunplay and all that. It's a very well made game.
It's like looking at Demon Souls and seeing where Dark Souls came from.
Yep, that's a very good comparison.
It was, Rockstar did very well for itself on the PS2. We mentioned Grand Theft Auto 3 earlier in the first half, but there was that
San
game.
Andreas and Vice City as well. And then
You had, I think, Bully and Manhunt. Were those?
Bully, I believe, was. I'm not sure about Manhunt.
No, I don't think Manhunt was.
Yes, it was.
Oh,
Yep.
really? Oh.
Manhunt was Rockstar. Midnight Club, that was one of theirs. Max Payne.
Oh, yeah, Max Payne. Wow, yeah, I forgot about that. That game is... That is a special title, for sure.
So Rockstar, like Jesus Christ, Rockstar did very, very well for itself. I mean, this is when they were really, really starting to make their mark.
I don't think it's a coincidence. I think that the PlayStation 2 success goes hand in hand with Rockstar's success. I don't think PlayStation becomes as successful as it did without Rockstar having, like, you know, starting with Grand Theft Auto 3, but, you know, all the games you mentioned, like, they all permeate, like, throughout the, like, different, like, cultures in the gaming industry at the time.
Like, I mean, I know that I'm not a big fan of the Rockstar games, but I mean, even so, I mean, just to not acknowledge just how much of a powerhouse they became, as you said, you know, not only driving PS2 sales, and becoming a big name in their own right. And you know,
I mean, they defined a genre and, like, basically created a market that didn't exist before that.
Basically, I remember, you know, Red Dead Revolver, because that came out in May 2004, and by that point, I was, you know, going at the end of my first year of college and going to Cape Cod in shame, and not looking forward to what awaited me on the Cape. But I remember when I was, you know, that was when I started working at Walmart, and just seeing the box art for Red Dead Revolver, I'm like, what the hell is Clint Eastwood doing in a game?
It's funny, too, because, like, you know, the Western hadn't really been touched on as a video game concept since, like, the Atari era, really. You know, which, you know, you would assume, like, cowboys and you know, Native Americans kind of thing is, like, very popular, you know, entertainment genre for a long time. So it was surprising to see the industry just kind of ignore that for so long, and then to have, like, Rockstar just kind of be like, oh, let's dabble in this, and then, like, you know, turn it into one of the most successful franchises currently running.
Yes, and just like, oh, okay, we're doing this now, and you know, we spoke a couple episodes ago talking about, you know, the current Red Dead games and how those have taken off, and you know, our friend Shanna just really, really loving the current games, and you know, it's a thing.
That was the free play episode.
Yes,
right?
Yes, it was. Another one that we've missed that I remember watching my stepbrother play a lot of, Prince of Persia.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's one I never played it, but I always was told to play it.
It's like, you should play this. I haven't. Well, you'll do so.
I don't wanna.
So there. Yep, go ahead.
I was gonna say that, and have we mentioned God of War yet?
We talked about it briefly at the beginning.
Okay. Because that was another one that kind of blew up the PS2.
Between it and Resident Evil 4, it, like, created the QuickTime craze. Like, between those two games, they came out within, like, 6 or 7 months of each other, if I remember correctly.
The first God of War came out in March of 2005.
Oh yeah, I'm thinking the PS1 release or the PS2 release for Resident Evil 4, not the GameCube, which would have been January. Yeah. So yeah, they came out, like, you know, right next to each other, basically, in like game released time, you know, and yeah. But you know, they both were PS2 games, obviously. So, but yeah, that God of War was like, it's such a strange game because there's so little boss fights. And you would think going into a game like that, there would just be, like, all these, like, huge monsters that are, like, these awesome, you know, boss fight kind of spectacles. Because we had, like, you know, the Shadow of the Colossus come out within that same kind of time frame. And instead, this game goes the exact opposite and gives you this, like, you know, hack and slash kind of effect, but then you get this like really interesting, story because of the backdrop they use of, the like ancient mythos, instead of having it be like more modern or like futuristic, like a lot of the different hack and slash games that were in the same vein gameplay wise.
And, winding down here as we are getting close to the end, a game that was considered a commercial failure when it came out, but still lives on in the world of PC and Steam, that little-known platformer that we call Psychonauts.
Yeah, that was like early 2000, like mid 2004, I think.
It came out mid 2005.
Oh, okay.
June 2005, and it was one of those games that I remember hearing a lot about because it was very well received critically, but bombed commercially to the point where the publisher left the video game market. It was developed by Double Fine Productions, which still exists today, but the publisher, Majesco Entertainment, folded because of how badly it bombed. It only sold about 100,000 units.
That's rough.
So, but again, the game lives on. You can get it on Steam right now for it's $10. So, it lives on. So I guess we have gone through a ton of games this episode. So I guess the question for me to ask all of you is, what was your favorite PS2 game?
Metal Gear Solid 3 for me. It's not for me. It's not close in terms of the PS2, at least. Like, the next best game to me on the PS2 after Metal Gear Solid 3 is God of War.
All right, either Ron.
I probably Guilty Gear, just because of what it meant for me in terms of like my teenage years, because it helped me make friends, like in terms of like being able to, like, I've met some friends online through doing fan art of Guilty Gear, and between meeting them, like, I've known them for like literally 15 years. So
for me, it's kind of funny because I'm going to be choosing a PS2 game, but it is not a game I played on PS2, and that is Persona 4. I absolutely adore that game. I prefer the fifth. I prefer number 5, but until the 5th came out, Persona 4 was one of my favorite RPGs was one of my top 10 RPGs of all time, and 5 took that spot. But that doesn't mean that 4 is any less good. 4 is an amazing game that kept me hooked for over 100 hours.
Nice. I love games like that. I too would probably go with Spencer and say Metal Gear Solid 3 is my personal favorite PS2 game. For a number 2 for me would be Xenosaga. I love that series to pieces. Mm-hmm. Despite all of its flaws, it was just so wonderfully done, and I was very disappointed when it was announced that the 3rd game was going to be the last in that series. So that is mine. So
an honorable mention for me is Psychonauts. I just love the art style of it so much.
It reminds me, the art style of Psychonauts reminds me of Oddworld.
Yeah, it does, and I love the art of Oddworld too. So
yeah.
Can't wait for the 2nd.
Oh, okay. Wait a minute. I thought there was isn't there a Psychonauts 2?
It's in development right now.
Oh.
It was kickstarted.
Didn't know that. I heard Psychonauts. I did not know that it was kickstarted. So, cool.
Yeah.
All right. So, I think we have done a ton of diving and a ton of nostalgia, so unless you guys have anything more you'd like to say about the PS2, I think we'll put this episode to bed. So if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, memories of the PS2, anything on this episode or any other episode of Downloadable Content, you can get a hold of us on our website, dlcpodcast.com. Click the feedback button, or you can message or comment on our Facebook at Downloadable Content or on Twitter at DL Content. And every single episode can be found on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, Google Play Music, and the website as well. So all it remains for me to do is to thank Ron, Ronny, Doug, and Spencer for being on this episode. And so on that fun note, I'm Brian. Have a good one, everybody.